opportunity, Alif and Burak. I think my journey into venture also started somewhat in line with Startup Istanbul. So some of the early days when I was starting out into venture, one of the first events was in Turkey that I attended, and it was great. There I also noticed there was a lot of actually interest from Pakistani startups that were flying all the way to Turkey to meet not just Turkish investors, but Startup Istanbul brings a lot of investors from the region, from Europe, from the Middle East. So that was great. I made a lot of connections there. So a bit of background on our journey into the venture space. So Fatima Group has been in Pakistan for over the last 80 years into mainly traditional industries. We have a large presence in fertilizer, large presence in textiles, sugar, and energy businesses. So when I joined the group in 2014, the idea was to also build out a venture arm of the business. So I started leading that. 2014 was a time when it was still early days in Pakistan. I think we were one of the first venture capital funds to be launched, backed by Fatima Group as the only LP then. So the idea it was also a startup for us, like an experiment to see if venture investments can really work in Pakistan. So what we did is we started making a few very, very early stage investments to see how the pilot project for the group works out. Then over the next 2 years, we partnered with one of the leading universities in Pakistan to set up a National Incubation Center Lahore, which is one of the now the largest incubation centers in the country. So that's some of the early steps we were taking. But now as the ecosystem is maturing, there are new funds announced, there is more interest from foreign investors into the country. We have launched a new early stage fund, which has also some of the other leading businesses of Pakistan as investors, and some of the regional LPs in the fund. So Fatma Group, from being a single LP in this new fund, is one of the LPs. And that new fund is in partnership with Gobi Partners. So we can speak more about that as well.
Great.
I mean, following Elif questions, what is the motivation that you became an investor? Because your background is also diversified as group companies and also your education. So what is the motivation to become an investor?
I think it's there are many obviously there's the financial opportunity, but beyond that, if you look at Pakistan, we're a population of 200 million people, right? Very, very young population. 70% of the population is below 30 years of age, and that is one. Two, as it's happened in other countries, when I started looking at the space, we were at 30 million 3G, 4G users. In the last 5 years, we have more than doubled that. So we are now 75 million internet users in the country. So young population, a lot of talent that is there. Matching that with digitization and how it's creating new opportunities, it seemed very, very interesting. We had seen this happen in many other countries, Turkey being one, many countries in Southeast Asia, China, India. So there was no reason why it wouldn't happen in Pakistan. Second was Pakistan has always been a country with great tech talent, but because local market wasn't connected yet, most of the tech opportunities in Pakistan were creating software for companies based out of the US, for companies based in the Middle East and UK. So for the first time, Pakistan as a customer of tech products was emerging. So this seemed like an exciting opportunity. Then beyond that, I think the motivation to create new generation of entrepreneurs in the country was also there, both as a personal objective, but as an objective of Fatima Group as well.
Yeah, I had a similar question, but more personally, actually, what motivates you while meeting new companies, new startups, new tech startups, when your interest on the tech startups has started?
So over the years, I think I started looking at it both when I was in college in the US. So I was at UPenn. So the interest obviously started there. A lot of my friends were involved with some of the tech companies and the activity in the US. So when I came back to Pakistan after my degree, I started wondering whether the same things could happen in Pakistan. And I think one of the biggest findings was that there were so many entrepreneurs in the country that were talented, but just needed to be given the opportunity. So that was a big motivation as to be able to play some part in that journey, and then really the impact we could do is because both on the it's an early ecosystem, so even those small initiatives will open up a very, very large opportunity, which we're now actually seeing the results from when we first started to now.
And if we come to the Fatima and Gobi Ventures, why did you look for a joint venture in Asia to establish this venture capital? As far as we know from the Fatima Group, you can also create a fund, I think in Pakistan, with your own funds. So what was the motivation to make a joint venture of this venture capital?
Okay, so I knew one of the managing directors. He was with me at a program in Stanford in 2015. So Jamal, who's now also one of the investment committee members of our fund. So we met each other in 2015. We had built a strong relationship there. But beyond that, once we started looking at a strategy for Pakistan, we knew it's not a one-time fund that we want to do. We want to have a very long-term approach with series of funds, early stage funds, and hopefully in the future growth stage funds, and so we can support startups at various stages of their life cycle. So when we were building out the strategy, we started questioning on things that the ecosystem has now and things that can add more value. So when we started looking at our strategy, we thought Fatima Group has a large local presence, large network in terms of facilitating startups, both from a policy perspective, from linkages locally, follow-on funding. And then if we were to partner with a foreign VC, that could complement the VC experience, as well as opening up regional markets and exit opportunities as well. So once we started looking, we started speaking to funds in the US. We started speaking to funds in the region, and what we liked with Gobi is so they had an interesting journey. They started in China when China was going through that early tech ecosystem phase. This was early in 2002. So that's when Gobi had launched their first fund in China. Then they had a lot of learnings in China. And then just when Southeast Asia was opening up, they were one of the first Chinese VCs to move into Southeast Asia. So the learnings that they had in China, they were now able to replicate in Southeast Asia. So we thought with that experience of seeing how early ecosystems develop and plan out, they could bring in a lot of value into Pakistan. So that was one. Two, Gobi has had now over 250 investments across their 12 funds. And in that, a lot of early stage ecosystems attract funding in similar verticals. So for example, if I'm looking at company A in Pakistan, it's a likelihood that they might have invested in a similar company in China or in Southeast Asia. So uh, uh, lots of learnings can take place there. For example, now they have a regional day where they bring in all their travel companies to one room, and then they do strategy sessions where they can either partner up with each other, they can do many kinds of things that can help the startups go regional. Then both on the exit side, I think some of the strategic players like Alibaba that are now active in Pakistan. So Gobi has sold many companies to them and some of the other players. So that complements our position in Pakistan, and that can be seen with some of the companies that we're investing in, that we can really help them develop both locally and go into the region.
It's great. And we also had an interview with Thomas from Gobi Ventures. So the audience also can watch it and get more insights about the Gobi Ventures also from our YouTube channel. And Ali, could you give us more details about the fund that you launched with Gobi Ventures? So what is your total size and ticket size, and do you have any specific verticals that you want to invest in? I'm sure all of the startups are curious about them.
Yeah, so right now it's an early stage fund. What we're looking at is investment ranges of, I think the smallest of maybe $100,000 US to about $2 to $3 million US at Series A. So that's the range. The companies, honestly, right now, if you look at Pakistan and the kind of companies that are coming out, or there's a lot of opportunities coming in the fintech space, e-commerce, on-demand, mobility. A lot of the investments that you typically see in ecosystems when they are developing. But having said that, we are open to evaluating opportunities across. A lot of our thesis is driven though by looking at cases that have been extremely successful in other markets and finding local market leaders or people we think have the potential to really scale. So that's roughly how we evaluate companies.
So the fund will not be only investing in Pakistan, but other countries as well.
No, this fund will be primarily for Pakistani founders or tech companies with a large presence in Pakistan. The market doesn't necessarily have to be Pakistan, but for example, if it's an entrepreneur who's developing a product for the US market, but could set up maybe their tech team is from Pakistan or the founders from Pakistan, we can look at that. Or it could be any founder who sees Pakistan as a big opportunity and is trying to scale. So it's that way a bit more focused geographically, but yeah.
And what will be the ticket size and the stage focus of the startups?
Yeah, it's seed and Series A. So between $100,000 to about $2 million.
And Is there a specific vertical or a sector?
Right now, we're seeing we're open in the sense because the ecosystem is developing. So most of the funds right now are more agnostic rather than vertical focused. But having said that, we're seeing a lot of opportunities in the fintech space, into e-commerce and mobility, logistics, and those kind of plays, which are, as I had mentioned, are typical of early ecosystems. So if you look at where the funding is going in, let's say, a lot of Southeast Asian countries and in the Middle East, you will find that most of the funding is going in these verticals.
And how do you find your deal flow from startups? How do they apply to you, or what is your source tools about it?
So as we had mentioned, we run one of the largest incubation programs in the country. So a lot of the very early stage companies, we do get to see them early on, and then they can, once they are done with the program, they can also apply to the fund. So that's a growing source as we move forward and as that incubator matures. Then a lot of it is now becoming referrals. So either founders, again through our incubator that have gone through the program, companies that we've invested in. A lot of the times, people we're working with, so strong local partners that are making those referrals. Then a lot of it is just people reaching out, either through our website, through social media, emails. So right now we try to evaluate as many opportunities as we can, but still we're limited as you can imagine.
So when you meet with an entrepreneur or founders that apply to you, what are your red flags? Which means, how do you evaluate a founder or founders, co-founders? Which variables are you looking, and what should be the red flags that you don't want to see in the team?
Yeah, I think we meet founders over a stretch of period. So it's not a one meeting. So let's say it may be over a period of 2-3 weeks. We will meet maybe founders several times in that time period. And one thing that we like to see is from our first meeting to our progressive meetings, the progress being made, because that is a very good indicator of how efficient and how focused founders are. Because for early stage startups, especially, metrics actually are not even month on month. They have to be week on week metrics and how you're tracking for early stage. And then obviously it graduates to being more month on month metrics. So that is one. The other important metric is the ability to hire good people. So whether the founders can bring smart co-founders or first key hires of the company, and how successful were they in attracting that talent? Because eventually, as you build companies, it's more about people and being able to convince them to be part of the story. So once you are able to convince them, then it's, I think, easier to also convince investors to be part of your story. So these two, and then obviously the founder's ability, his background, all of those play into our evaluation. But I would say early on, it's more about for us about the founders and the team, and then obviously as we progress further, traction plays an important part. Size of the market plays another important part.
And well, we all know that most of the startups actually fail during their journey at the end, or I'm not sure if we should call it failure, but it ends somehow. So what are the main reasons actually for startups to fail? Do you think?
I think so. There are many reasons, right? So if you look at a tech company, it's taking many risks. So there's a founder risk, there's a technology risk, there's a business model risk. Then obviously there's a risk of finance and being able to raise funding, especially now when it's becoming increasingly more challenging to raise funding. So all these risks play into a founder's journey. But I also think founders should actually, it's maybe a myth to say that founders should not be risk averse. Actually, successful founders are ones who are more risk averse in the sense that they do see risks, but they try extremely hard to mitigate those risks, right? But biggest risk early on is the execution and the founder risk. So that's why most of our time goes on building conviction on whether the ability to execute, especially during hard times, will be there or not. But having said that, you are not always right.
Did you start investing with this fund, or from the earlier investments? What do you see the difference between successful and other startups?
I think it's again the what we've seen is the successful startups, their progress, and each time we would meet in our meetings, it would be that execution and the speed at which they were, whatever objectives they had agreed to, they were executing those, versus founders that were lagging behind in some of those things. But also, I think successful startups were the ones that were upfront with the challenges they had, meaning that some of the startups, I think it's also very important that if you're facing challenges, to not delay taking decisions. You have to be upfront and take some of those hard decisions and seek support. If you have built a strong network of angels and VCs, they can really be a sounding board during those times, right? So we also saw that being a difference of successful startups were actually more proactive in reaching out early on, that hey, we're facing X challenge, can you help us find a solution? Mm-hmm. So that was a very, very important difference.
And could you please tell us also more about your success stories that about startups that you have already invested in, and the
yes,
journey about...
It's still an early journey for us. Many of our startups, most of them actually are still from the previous investments we were doing and from the incubation. Most of them are still active. From the new fund, we have so far, the fund was actually launched end of last year, and then we made our first investment in a company called Airlift. It was an early stage investment, and now they've been doing really well in Pakistan. They've grown their business, they've expanded, and also have brought in some of the leading investors from the valley, like First Round Capital and some of the other large investors. But it's still early days for us.
And what do you think about the Pakistani internet market, which means it's an untouched market and it's growing. The number of startups are increasing. We are very familiar with that, but how do you see the economy of technology market in Pakistan? And also, following up this question, how will these outbreak will affect these new startups?
So it's interesting. I think those are very, very good questions. So when I started looking at Pakistan, I remember we were involved with just anecdotally with a startup competition. We used to receive this was 2014, 2015, about 200 to 300 applications for that startup pitch competition. Now, when we're still involved with that, we receive maybe 1,500 to 2,000 applications just for that. So number of startups definitely growing. One. The other interesting thing is that many, and this is, I think, a very important indicator. Many people are leaving their multinational jobs to start tech companies. That only happens in an ecosystem because these people, for them to switch over, has a very, very high cost. So we're seeing that happen increasingly as more mature people who were, let's say, working for Unilever in Pakistan or working for let's say even our company in Pakistan are leaving to do startups. So that tells you the ecosystem is developing. Some early, like you see in the Middle East, with a lot of founders leaving Kareem to now doing their own startups, and you've seen similar things happen in the US. So that's happening with, let's say, Daraz when was sold to Alibaba. Some of the founders left, and now they're running promising startups in the country. So we're definitely seeing an increase in supply of quality startups, and also talent for these startups to be able to grow. So that's definitely changing. Two, obviously, in the last 5 years, 3G and 4G has played a big role, and now Pakistan is at 75 million internet users, but it's one of the fastest growing. So very soon we will cross the 100 million mark as in the next few years. So it will be one of the largest economies, largest digitally connected populations. And then I think if you look at the services, so Pakistan has now over 11 million households in the middle income, and the consumption of various industries like retail, mobility, food, is very, very low digital internet penetration, but it's making a big shift. So this roughly consumption is about $300 billion, of which, as an example, e-commerce is now just near the $1 billion mark, which is 0.03% of the total retail sector. As an example, China is the most advanced with 20%. India is maybe 4 or 5 times our number. US is maybe 10-11%. So we see a huge shift that will happen of traditional industries moving to digital commerce, right? Which has already happened in China, India, Southeast Asia, European countries. So I think that will be a very, very large opportunity. Now, coming to your second question, in times of COVID and how that's planning out for Pakistan. So what's very interesting is that most of the funds in Pakistan are new funds that are not fully deployed yet. Most of them are not even 20% deployed that because they came. Most of them came in the last 2 years. So funding in Pakistan, actually, if you compare it to last 2 years to this year, it will be the highest it's ever been. But having said that, Pakistan is right now does not have access to local growth stage funds. Most of the growth stage capital, people are looking for funding, and startups are looking for funding outside of Pakistan. So how that ties into the cycle is, as funding dries out in the short run, in core markets for foreign funds, they will not be focused on Pakistan per se. So funding will become difficult for people who are trying to raise growth capital right now. But as we saw in 2008 time, funding dropped, I think, in the VC in the US by 40-50%. But it took about a year and a half to 2 years for it to come back to its normal or 2008 levels. So people who are raising now should factor that in, that if they raise now, they can maybe try and plan out longer runways. So as funding in foreign markets comes back to normal and people all of a sudden have more dry powder to invest, they will be able to then benefit from that. And then from our fund perspective, I think we're lucky that we are also now going into the market to invest, right? So at this time, you will get better valuations. You will then see as the markets recover, you will be in most of the better opportunities that have survived this period. And if you also track funds that were investing during the downturn at the uptick, they've generally outperformed other funds. So we see this as a big opportunity. But at the same time, you have to see which companies will come out as winners in respective sectors.
Is there a pipeline of investment during these times? Are you going to actively invest in upcoming months?
Yeah, we are actively looking, but most of our conversations, to be honest, right now are conversations that we were already having, and turns out that most of the companies were actually positively impacted from the scenario. But having said that, we are also looking at companies that might be impacted negatively in the short run. But we think once markets settle, they will actually come out as market leaders in some of those sectors. But finding or starting new conversations, obviously all the VCs, as this lockdown is becoming longer, are coming to the idea that maybe you can meet someone for the first time on a video call like this, and then build a relationship, which is very important. So those ideas now are being entertained, but let's see.
And how do you think the startups can survive this period of time of coronavirus?
I think taking those difficult decisions is very important. So for example, if you're looking to cut down on costs, the longer you wait and face reality, it will cost you more. And the earlier you can make some of those decisions, it will be better for the company. So I think startups need to, I think this is the time to actually use and see how your unit economics are turning out. Areas that you were thinking were lagging behind, maybe on the product side, maybe on the user experience side, you can start working on this. This obviously is for startups that have been negatively impacted. Mm-hmm. But then there are startups that are in a different situation, that are, for example, grocery companies that are doing online delivery in Pakistan as well, have seen a huge uptick in numbers. So they have a different problem. They now quickly need to raise capital and expand their business. So that's a different situation.
And there are also questions from the audience, Ali, and they're asking mainly how can they apply, what are the requirements. They have idea stage or prototype stage or product stage startups. Is it valid to apply for the new fund? And also, I mean, adding to these questions, there are some other additional ones which wants to ask how to raise money with the VC. So I have all together asked you in a one question set. So should you clarify?
So I think I'll also leave my email in the comment boxes. So feel free to reach out and email me to get in touch if you want to have a more detailed session. Generally, we look at companies that have launched already with some early indications that we can measure of whether it's revenue, whether it's users, and some of those early metrics that we can also evaluate. That is typically the best time to invest. Having said that, if you're an idea stage or very early on, then you can, if you're based in Pakistan, you can also apply to our incubation program, which is the National Incubation Center. And we also have a program which is more of an accelerator program. It's not a batch program. There we select companies that we really like, but don't really necessarily fit the investment thresholds of the fund yet. So we offer them a space where we keep tracking them, and then they can reapply to the fund. So that is another area how you can apply.
How long does the application or selection or investment process takes, depending on the past experiences?
It depends. I think we can end to end. Typically, it can take, based on past experience, about depending on the stage, about a month's time or around that time. From end.
And Elif, do you have additional questions?
Is there any? I mean, I know you said that it's a new fund, but as an investor, is there any startup company that you missed to invest in and you regret about that? I mean, in Pakistan or wherever in the world?
No, I think in the world there are many, but we didn't have the funds then, or fund set up to invest in. I think Pakistan has also in the last few years, or Pakistani founders have created great companies, both domestically and globally. So naming those companies, most recently you might have heard of Zameen, which started from Pakistan, now is a global company with operations in the Middle East and now in Southeast Asia as well. Then Kareem is one. In the US, there are several examples of companies with large teams in Pakistan, but targeting the US market. So multiple companies that
So,
if we were there early on, we could have.
Ali, in these lockdown days, did you watch any movies or read any additional books that you can recommend to the startups and founders?
So many. I think most of my time these days, a lot of that has gone into many webinars like this, many podcasts that we've been following. I think right now I can't really recall a lot of them, but I'm happy to share them via email or. Yes. But TV shows, actually, it's very interesting that there's a Turkish TV show that has become very popular in Pakistan these days.
Which
one?
Moving aside, so Ertugrul, it's so popular these days in Pakistan.
Yeah, it's a huge market also in Turkey. I mean, they are all the series are all around the world right now, and they're having been watched a lot by many countries. So thank you, Ali, for being with us today. We also look forward to seeing you in Istanbul, hopefully on Startup Istanbul. Probably we will have on 20 to 22nd of October, fingers crossed. And thank you again for all your contribution today.
Ali, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your valuable time and insights and experiences. And please stay safe and healthy, and hope to see you in Istanbul back.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
For the audience, we will have Guy Kawasaki on Thursday evening at the same time. Legendary name of Silicon Valley, we can say, and chief evangelist of Canva. See you all Thursday evening.